Welcome to the Jedburgh podcast. I'm the creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Each episode, I speak with transformative leaders, visionaries, drivers of change, and those dedicated to winning no matter the challenge. The Jedburgh podcast is founded in the lineage of the special operations Jedburgh teams of the past and is produced in partnership with Talent War Group, a management consulting and executive search firm focused on helping you optimize the people side of your business. We're sponsored by Jersey Mike Subs. Together, we share the mission of giving, making a difference in someone's life. Visit the Jedburgh Podcast, Talent War Group, and Jersey Mike Subs on the web and on all social media. A percentage of all proceeds is dedicated to the Green Beret Foundation, supporting America's Special Forces and their families.
Grass was breaking, and then the night just erupted into gunfire. And I thought, well, crap. I'm really not going to make it out of here, because I thought we were being kidnapped by another group. But it turns out I was not being kidnapped. I was actually being rescued.
In that first moment, families are in some ways paralleling what Jess just talked about. It's the shock. It's the lack of information. It's the sense making of something that you will have never seen in your life.
About 200 Americans are taken hostage or wrongfully detained each year across the globe. We usually only hear about a few of them. The reasons vary. Money is the most common reason for kidnapping. Ideology is another. America has a promise to its citizens. We'll do whatever it takes for however long it takes to come get you and bring you home. For this episode, I traveled to Old Town Alexandria, just outside Washington, D.C., for a conversation on keeping America's promise. I'm joined by Jessica Buchanan and Liz Cathcart. Jessica was an aid worker taken hostage in Somalia. She spent 90 days captive, enduring poor physical health and severe illness. Jessica shares her story of kidnapped by some of the very children she went to Somalia to educate and help. She explains how she coped with detention and the complete loss of control of her life. And she describes her last night in captivity that went from a surreal quiet to gunfire to some of the most important words in American power. Jessica, this is the American military. We've come to take you home. You're safe. I've known Liz Cathcart for several years now. Liz is the executive director of Hostage US, a nonprofit that supports hostages and their families. Liz shares the 4 pillars of support Hostage US provides. She describes the difficulty reintegration brings and explains how Hostage US supplies the necessary resources to help all involved cope with redefining their lives after captivity. Take a listen to my conversation with Jessica and Liz on your favorite podcast platforms. Watch the full video version from Alexandria on YouTube. Pick up a copy of Jessica's book, Impossible Odds, to learn more about her captivity and rescue by SEAL Team 6. Follow her on social media at Jessica Buchanan and on the web at jessicabuchanan.com. Go to hostageus.org to get involved with Hostage US to support American hostages and detainees and their families as they cope with captivity and reintegration. Don't miss my episode 9 conversation with Hostage US board member and former hostage of Somali pirates for 977 days, journalist Michael Scott Moore. Subscribe to us and follow at Jedburgh Podcast on all social media. Check out our website, jedburghpodcast.com. Jess, Liz, welcome to the Jedburgh podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
We've been trying to set this up for a while, so I'm super excited that we're here in Old Town Alexandria, and we have a couple of days in DC, and I thought that it would be a great opportunity to connect because this episode is going to come out right around the holidays, and the holidays, are a time where so many of us come together with our loved ones. And I think it's really important that we keep in the back of our minds those who can't be with us. And Hostage US, as an organization, Jess, your story took place over the holidays.
Sure did.
And I thought that this could be a very timely discussion to highlight both your story and the work that the organization's doing.
Yeah, I definitely, every time the holidays roll around for me, I can't help but go back and revisit those 93 days where I was very much away from my family.
And we've been fortunate over since we started the podcast, we had Michael Scott Moore on, who also spent some time with Somali pirates, so 2 years and 9 months, and he was on episode 8, and one of our first episodes that really started gaining. His story was so captivating, and the way he tells it. But his story is also what brought me to Hostage US, and I've talked about it before. But I met Liz and I met Michael at a Sony Pictures event and was immediately looking at what I saw was a ghost, because when I had been in Africa, I had been briefed on his case every day. And we were actively always trying to figure out where he was, what information could we get. And your case and his case were very closely aligned, yours being just previous to his, but we'll get into everything. But a lot of the reason why they went to ground with him was because of your successful rescue. Yeah. And so telling that story and then being able to sit here with you today, to me, is a tremendous honor. So I thank you very much for making the trip.
I'm obviously happy to be here. So
also, this whole world, I want to talk about Hostage US for a few minutes, because as an organization, they're doing tremendous work. And Liz, we'll go into the mission of the organization, but near and dear to my heart, we talk about the Jedburghs, we talk about their history, 3-man teams parachuted into occupied France the night before D-Day. Alone and unafraid is the term I use to link up with French resistance. And many of them were captured, and many of them were killed in capture. And that organization went on to become the Green Berets. And every special operator, whether you're a Green Beret or a Navy SEAL or a MARSOC Raider or an Air Force PJ or a special operator there, you go through a tremendous amount of training to set you up for these situations. But I will tell you that all of that gets thrown out the window when you're in that situation. It doesn't matter what training you've had, as you know, firsthand. So it's a story, and it's an organization that when I came onto it, I was immediately said, this is something I want to support. So Liz, can you talk for a few minutes about Hostage US, the mission, and how you've been impacting this space over the last several years?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks. I appreciate that kind of intro and setting the scene. So Hostage US is a NGO. We support families of Americans taken hostage abroad or wrongfully detained by state actors. And we support them through a variety of different services, including financial advisory, legal support, mental health, just general emotional support. And we just try to help them to cope throughout the case. And then when they need to make decisions, we're there to help be a soundboard for them and think through some of the decisions. So one of the things actually that you're saying, Fran, at the beginning, as the operational side, there's so many people involved in the operations on these cases, but what gets left out of the picture is the family, right? The family who's at home fighting every day for their loved one, but isn't getting enough information to know and understand every element of the operations, is suffering with financial burden, legal problems that come up when, a spouse or a child or parent is taken hostage. So we're there to support on those elements of it. And then when folks are released and come home, we help them to get back on their feet. And we have very similar services for folks who are coming home. I guess the caveat there is that we also have hospital partnerships where we can send them to different hospitals that can give them, a full checkup on their medical needs, mental health needs, dental, nutritional needs, and things like that.
And these are not, it's important to note too here that these are not isolated incidents. I mean, we average about, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but somewhere around 200 Americans every year who are in some form of captivity. As you mentioned, I mean, right now you think about the Brittany Griner situation, right. That's going on in Russia. And we hear about the high profile cases like yours, Jessica and Michael, but this is happening all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's different elements to it too, right? Because you have criminal groups who take hostages for anywhere from a couple hours to, a couple weeks. And then you have terrorist organizations that take folks for much, much longer. And then you have wrongful detentions where it's a state actor who's holding an American for a political pawn. And for political reasons. So, the support that we give runs a gamut of situations that are hours long to situations that are 10 plus years long. And you're right, every year we have about 200 Americans who are taken hostage, and many of those are resolved fairly quickly and not with the input of, the government or anything like that. But the cases that are, particularly impactful and challenging to manage are those terrorist and wrongful detention cases that last for a long time.
So there's 4 I call them pillars, but there's 4 manuals that the organization has written. The first one's coping with kidnapping. The second one's a life a life after captivity. The third one's getting back to work. And then there's the fourth one is handling the media and social media. And we talk a lot about media and social media. I think they make a lot of more problems sometimes, especially in situations like this. Being part of the media, I guess I can say that. But I thought what we would do is take these 4 areas and we would talk about your story, Jess, and tie back in where Hostage US comes into the picture during each one of these phases, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
So you went to Africa.
I did.
And I actually really love this. I say that and we're laughing now, but you went to Africa to work with school children. I went to Africa for a very different reason, to combat terrorism. But you wanted an unconventional way of teaching. There's so many organizations in Africa who are doing that. And then there's so many organizations on the terrorist organization side who are targeting people who are going to the continent to do really good work and really impactful work for a demographic and populations who have almost nothing, relatively nothing. You used a term called Africa, Jess,
oh, God.
which I started laughing about because I have many pictures of Africa, Fran.
I'm dying right here.
And so I wanted to ask you about that.
15, 20 years ago, Jess. It's a whole new life.
I need an Africa Liz again.
Oh my God.
Everybody needs an
African experience, right? My husband cringes every time that comes up. Yeah, I mean, we all do things like this, right? Like you're young and you're idealistic, and I don't ever do anything like conventionally, or, it's not in my DNA. And I'm a teacher at heart. Always, everything I do will always have some sort of teaching component to it. But, I got a teaching degree at a university outside of Philadelphia, and while everybody was getting their student teaching positions lined up, and the public schools in the college town, I was like, I think I'll go to Kenya. And so I did, and it was amazing. And the school offered me a job, and it was an international school. So, I had pictured something very different and had actually done trips, like volunteer trips, where I'd been like in the bush and, done things a little bit more simplistically. But I also needed to eat if I was going to work. And so I had to actually make a salary, which definitely wasn't much, but I was 25 and started teaching 4th grade in an international school in Nairobi, and oh my gosh, it was so much fun. I loved it. And like literally 2 weeks after I landed there, I met my now husband out one night, a Swedish guy named Eric. I thought his name was Oric all night until he wrote his phone number down. I'd never met anybody from Sweden. It seemed totally like, plausible. And we dated for a year and a half and got married. And he's the equivalent of a human rights lawyer. And so he was working for a Swedish organization, and then started working for a Dutch organization. And they moved him up to Hargeisa, Somaliland, so he could do his work. And we didn't want to have a long distance marriage. So I quit my teaching job and moved up there because, again, I'm a teacher. I can find work anywhere. And I did. And I made a new life for myself up there in Hargeisa, which is a very strange place to start out your newly married life. But it was also like one of those.
Bring you together.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of those things that I could never recreate the environment and the people that I spent time with and the friends that I made. And it was just really fun. And the work that I ended up doing, I started working for an NGO, a Danish organization, and they worked in community safety and armed violence reduction, which was not my technical expertise, but you can learn anything. And I really threw myself into the job, and it was amazing. I traveled all over East Africa doing education advising for the organization. And it was great until it wasn't. So October 25th, 2011, I was on a field mission. I had a staff training down in Galkayo, a little bit north of Mogadishu, Somalia. And I didn't feel good about it. I had canceled it 2 times before, but my colleague, a Danish gentleman named Paul, he was my counterpart living down there, running that field office. And he, put a lot of pressure on me. You need to get down here. This is your job. The staff's waiting for you, blah, all the things. And, I kind of always chuckle, I'm a school teacher from Ohio. So, what's the worst that's going to happen? And the worst thing did happen. I went down there. It was 3 days. The third day when we were in transit, which was what I was worried about, because if something's going to happen, it's usually going to be when you're on the road. I was on my way back to the North office, about ready to get on a plane to get back up to Hargeisa, and our car was overtaken by armed men. And that moment, it changed the rest of my life.
Talk about the first 24 hours, because when we look at hostage situations, captivity situations, you have to get through those first 24 hours, because you're pent up on both sides. Emotions are high on the hostage taker and the hostage themselves. And this is where a lot of things tend to go wrong, unexpected, on both sides. Talk a little bit about, if you would, the first 24 hours, your mindset, and how you actually got through that.
Well, the kidnapping happened probably around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and they drove us out of Galkayo, and I could tell we were going south, which was really bad, because to me, southern Somalia meant Al-Shabaab, and I'm an American woman. My passport was in my bag in the back. There was no way I could fake that, even if they didn't know who I was. So that felt really, really scary. And, I've got a gun to my head. There are armed gunmen all over the place. We're being driven for hours. We stop. We change personnel several times. We stop and have to get in different vehicles. And we drive for maybe 7-8 hours into the middle of the night. And I remember having to just on repeat, how a song gets stuck in your head and you can't think of, I had 2 thoughts that were just running through my head on repeat, and I couldn't think anything else. And the first one was this is bad. This is bad. This is bad. Whatever this is, whatever is happening right now is so bad. I don't have any frame of reference to access in my brain as to what to do, because nothing in my life has prepared me for something like this. I'd been through an internal heat training with the organization that was very lackluster at best. But somewhere I remembered that if I lived through the first 48 hours, then they probably weren't going to kill me, so maybe I had a chance of survival. So that 24 to 48 hour window was very, very much important to me in terms of okay, just stay alive. And then the other thought that I kept thinking was if I make it out of this thing, nothing will ever be the same for me again. Yeah. This has changed. It has changed everything. And so I think it was probably, 3, 4 in the morning. They stopped the vehicles one final time and forced us out of the cars and ordered us to walk out into the desert. And that was kind of this, not kind of, it was a very final moment for me, because I thought for sure that this was it. I'm going to be marched out into the desert. I'm going to be gang raped. I'm going to be executed. And I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what I did to deserve this. This is so random, I thought. And we marched, we were surrounded. I still remember hearing these belts of ammunition, bullets clanking together as we walked, and we're just surrounded. And then they forced us down onto our knees, and I don't know if everybody thinks this, but I've always wondered, what's it going to be like when I die? What are those final moments going to be like? And I just never thought to imagine that it would end so violently. And then one of them just tells us to go to sleep, just collapse in the ground and go to sleep. And that's what I did. At first, I think when you're in such a stressful situation, your body just takes over, because it needs to protect you, and it knew my mind needed an escape for a few hours. So I blacked out. I just completely passed out from the stress and the shock. And it would go on, we woke up the next morning. We couldn't figure out who had us. We were just being ordered to, go sit under, there was no information for weeks. It was kind of you're just sitting there watching this very new, strange world go by, and you're not privy to any of the decisions or the information.
Yeah. Liz, I want to ask you about this initial point of capture. Can you talk for a minute about where does hostage U.S. start to come into the picture in a situation like this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And as soon as possible is the best way of doing it. But, naturally, families aren't necessarily thinking of themselves. They aren't thinking they might need the support. And frankly, no one's thinking it's going to be any longer than a couple days, a couple hours, right? That's the hope. So when we are introduced pretty early on, what we start to do is start to help the family think through, if it is a bit longer, how can we help you to get in the best situation that you can be for the long term? Obviously, that's a really delicate conversation that you kind of have to, open up to with the family. But, in that first moment, families are in some ways paralleling what Jess just talked about. It's the shock. It's the lack of information. It's the sense making of something that you will have never seen in your life. Most families will have never even heard about the agencies in the government that respond to these things, because they shouldn't.
Right.
So let's hope no one else does, right? But it's those initial moments of just such shock, denial, just hoping it's over in a minute, right? Those feelings that Jess was going through, to some degree, her family was as well when they heard about it.
Let's talk about the second phase. So, and this is the captivity piece, where, as you mentioned, Jess and Liz, you don't know. You've made it through the first couple of days, and now is today the day that there's something happens, or how long am I gonna be here? And constantly now having to come to start to think about this. You mentioned you were a woman in captivity in a country that generally doesn't respect women and has a difficult time interacting with women. You were an American, which also ups the price. Certainly, as we've seen, history shows us that over and over again. And they're constantly trying to move you. But generally, and I don't care if I'm offensive to them, they're a bunch of idiots.
I would say that not as a people group.
Right.
Say that
Yes.
The men that were on the ground paid to guard me were not the most intelligent people that I have spent time with. I think that there are a lot of extenuating circumstances that cause that, which is probably why I was there in the first place. If you're in a place that lacks infrastructure and doesn't have education in place, and even basic necessities like clean water and food, then you're not going to rise to your ultimate potential, right, as a person. And you got this secondary drug issue, essentially, where they all chew khat. It's an amphetamine type plant, and it makes them as in those who chew it, but it's largely it's a cultural thing. So I'm surrounded then by anywhere from 6 to 30 men, ages 9 to maybe 40s. They're all sleep deprived, poverty stricken, and high on amphetamines. So it's not a great mixture for anything. And there are some moments, I think it's important to point out that in any kind of stressful or tragic situation, and I know now in retrospect, because I've heard from my family's perspective, that they had, again, it mirrors the same kind of situation, but there are moments that can be funny, I remember one morning waking up like 2 or 3 weeks in, and there were 3 Land Cruisers parked over on the side of the camp. And there were probably like 15 or 20 guards keeping, us on the camp. And there was all of this commotion around the vehicles. And I realized after watching them for a minute that they had locked the keys in the getaway car. And I was like, I remember turning to Paul and looking at him, and I said, it's official. Like, we've been kidnapped by the world's dumbest pirates. But, it's scary too.
Yeah.
Because if your life is hanging in the balance and is in, there people who lack some common sense and some judgment they've got heavily armed weapons, then, that's really scary. So I came to the realization, I think I'd rather be held hostage by really smart people than what was happening over here. So, I have my anecdotes, but in all seriousness, it's dangerous.
Yeah, we talk in most of our episodes about these 9 characteristics of elite performance, and they're actually what special operations uses to recruit and assess talent. Mm-hmm. I talked a lot about when I mentioned we had Michael on, and he gives a very similar rendition of the folks that he was afforded the opportunity to spend some time with. I'll put it that way.
He had way more time than I did. It should be noted. So,
but drive, resiliency, adaptability, humility, integrity, curiosity, team ability, emotional strength, effective intelligence, team ability make up these 9. And when I talked to Mike, I said, listen, in order to get through this situation, you have to exhibit all of these at various times. In your case, it's certainly no different. What did you lean on during this period of captivity? And what did you constantly come back to that gave you the strength every day to, in the limited sleep that you had out in the field, wake up and say, I can make this another day, knowing also that so many things are out of your control?
Mm-hmm. I would say 2 things. I'm the oldest of 3, and my mom had just passed away the year before, and this happened. And so I think I felt very much like a weight of responsibility to survive for my family, because I knew that they needed me. My sister and my brother, they needed me. My dad needed me, and my husband needed me to survive. So I respond very well to that, I think, and thinking that people are depending on me. So that gives me strength. I would say the other part would be my faith. I grew up in a very religious household, and while I would say now my spiritual life has deviated from the way I was raised, I lean very heavily on my connection to my creator in those times. And what came from that actually was there were moments, if not hours and days, of uninterrupted introspection that I hold very sacred now to my own spiritual and personal development. I think that I was able to connect with myself in a way in those moments that I would never have had an opportunity to otherwise. And so for me, it takes I think I had to surrender the outcome and control of the situation and give it to like a higher power, and just trust that I was going to be okay no matter what happened. And that was a familiar way for me to operate, because that's how I had been raised. So, I think those would be my 2.
During this period of captivity, and Liz, I want to ask you about it, this is when the negotiation starts, and you have the proof of life phone calls. And Jess, you tell in the story, sometimes they let you talk, sometimes they wouldn't, but you were generally there when they were making these phone calls. But there's also a lot of background conversations going on, and there's all these interludes and different people who are trying to get different pieces of the pie, certainly on the Somali side, but then also all the government organizations. Right. Liz, during this period of time, Can you talk a bit about the negotiation process and how that's handled? Because so much isn't known by the person by the kidnapped,
Right.
yet the family is dealing with a lot on that side. And most often it's an unreasonable request for some extraordinary amount of money that they just don't understand doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. And I should just preface all this with I'm not the expert in negotiations.
Yeah. You guys don't negotiate on
We
on
do
that
not.
front, I
We
know
do
that.
not. Hostage US stays out of the operational response of kidnappings, and we provide the support. However, that does obviously encompass the support of families who are going through this, clearly. Right. So the families are the ones who are on the phone with the kidnappers, as you said, the ones who are, trained in 10 minutes before the call or whatever it may be to be the negotiating power for that person. You're exactly right. I mean, I think Mike Scott Moore actually says it when, his original ransom was wildly absurd and kind of, came down from there. But it's this new skill that the families have to learn immediately, right? They're taught by FBI how to be on the phone with hostage takers. Everything's, recorded. They typically have FBI agents in the room with them, offering guidance and things like that. But it's, up to the family to be discussing with the kidnapper. I think for us, for Hostage US's side, we take these moments as, an opportunity to re-engage with the family on the emotional side and just make sure that whenever the proof of life or the calls come in that, from the kidnappers, we're able to be there right after to debrief, to ensure the family that, no matter what they said, they did it right. They did it to the best of their ability at the time. And I know Jess and I have talked about that too. You always, you do your best at that moment, knowing what you know at that moment. And for the families, that's always it. And so our role a lot of the time is to make sure that the families understand that it's an impossible task to be asked to do this from nothing. And, the conversations that they have with the kidnappers is, the best to their ability. Our role kind of throughout the kidnapping is just, holding hands with the family and making sure that they know they're not alone. The secrecy around these issues is so prevalent that it is such a burden for families, right? Imagine going through this and sitting here with us and not being able to tell us that your wife is being held somewhere. I mean, it's really unimaginable in terms of that emotional burden. And actually something that Jess had said about, there's funny moments as a captive. There's fun and funny moments as family too, but there's also a weight of guilt of having those funny moments, which is a really interesting aspect of a month, week, years even. Kidnapping is families pull away from these social events that could honestly keep them going in terms of coping through. But they feel incredibly guilty when they know their loved one is being held in the bush, to have a moment of joy and to have, some time to go out with friends and things like that. So oftentimes when, we do kind of intake calls or just have a relationship with a family, it's honestly reminding them, your loved one would want you to have a moment to yourself. It'll rejuvenate you. It'll make you feel like you're back in the game and be able to be your best self in responding to the cases as well. So I thought that was really interesting that you had mentioned that. And I've definitely heard that from a lot of former captives as well, where, you just have to laugh. So what else are you going to do in that moment?
100%.
Yeah.
And the family needs to do that too.
Exactly.
I mean, exactly. I can think somehow I got information through a phone call and I knew that my family was in Nairobi. And I remember just for days thinking and just praying like for Eric, my husband, please take them on safari because my dad and my sister hadn't been to Africa. Please take them to all my favorite places. Please. And they did exactly everything that I was hoping, and they got it. And it was not the experience that everybody was hoping for their first time being in Africa, but they, and they're a baboon broke into my brother's hotel room. And, so they tell these stories and it does, I think it also unites.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you need that.
Yeah. So these situations end eventually in one of a couple ways. On many and several end with the loss of the captive. Others end with the payment of ransom, as we saw in Mike's case, and others end in rescue. There's a defined set of criteria to launch a rescue, and I give our leaders in both the military and political leaders, the elected leaders, all the credit in the world, and sometimes don't envy them when they have to make these decisions. But there has to be risk to life. There has to be negotiations are not progressing forward, and then there's also that risk to health and well-being. And your case after 90 days really was at that situation. So can you talk for a minute about those last couple of days, emotionally, physically, your condition, and then President Obama's decision to launch the strike force?
Yeah. I think I was doing okay emotionally and mentally. I was trying to take them in like 2-week increments. So I would be like, okay, I can't think beyond 14 days. So I'm just going to focus on this 14 days and getting through that. And I was feeling pretty, I don't know, because 30 felt too long. That felt really scary to think of like another 30 days out here. I knew it wasn't going to be 7. So 14, I felt like, let's try to find the middle ground here for once in your life, Jess. And so, but I had gotten a urinary tract infection, and because, I'm like living in the dirt, like we weren't taken to a house, we weren't taken to a ship, nowhere, nothing. We were like sitting under a tree or a bush all day, sleeping out in the open at night, and like, all of that, what that entails. And it was turning into a kidney infection because it was untreated. So, fevers, the whole 9 yards, lots of pain. Obviously, they didn't care. My kidnappers, they just needed me alive enough so that they could cash me in. So they didn't need me comfortable. I'm begging for a doctor. I know because I'd been down this road before. I'm prone to them. I'd had a kidney infection once, was hospitalized in Nairobi for a week. So I knew I needed IVs. I needed antibiotics. I needed a doctor. And January 16th, 2012, I had the 6th and my final proof of life call. I didn't know at the time that it was going to be my final one. And my situation was different in the sense that I had a professional organization involved in the mix. So it wasn't my family who was on the phone. They did have professional hostage negotiators that were, provided by the insurance company. And so they were the ones taking the calls. And there was, and they called her the family communicator who would carry the messages back, a woman named Alex, that I would talk to. And I told her my symptoms. And I said, look, like, I'm not trying to be overly dramatic here, but I really think I'm in bad shape. And if you guys don't do something soon, I'm not sure I'm going to make it out of here. And so she carried the message to Eric, my husband, who then took it to my doctor, who said, well, Eric, you got to get her out of there. Like, she's got 2 weeks. Maybe that was why it was the 14 days. She's going to die. And so Eric took that information to the FBI. Matt Espinshade, who is the most amazing person on the planet, and who was working my case. And Eric would say that Matt and his colleague just looked at each other and walked out of the room, and he knew in that moment something was going to happen, but he didn't know how long and what it was. So it would be about 2 weeks, maybe 10 days, and then 10 days, yeah, because it was January 25th, 2012. And I just went to bed out in the field like I'd done all the other nights before. I woke up a couple hours after falling asleep because I was ill. I needed to be sick. And there were 9 guys on the ground that night, and no one stirred. At least one of them was always awake. But they were all passed out for some reason. And I did what I needed to do and came back to my mat and could hear something coming toward me in the brush, like grass was breaking. And then like the night just erupted into gunfire. And I thought, well, crap, I'm really not going to make it out of here, am I? because I thought we were being kidnapped by another group. But it turns out I was not being kidnapped. I was actually being rescued. And so it would take me several hours to figure out and put all the pieces together. But I had actually been rescued by SEAL Team 6, the elite guys who got Osama bin Laden. And it had been ordered by President Obama. And he actually, after it was the night of the State of the Union address, and then after he delivered his speech, he called my dad to let him know that I was safe and I was alive and I was coming home. So,
what do these words mean to you? Jessica, this is the American military. We've come to take you home. You're safe.
It's freedom. Yeah. And I mean, I was not exactly in my right mind when I heard those words. So all I could say over and over again was, "You're American? You're American?" Like, I just could, I just, and that was kind of the response that I got. But the whole 93 days I was out there, it never occurred to me that this could be a possibility. It just never crossed my mind. I didn't think anybody knew we were out there other than our organization. I had no idea the FBI was involved. I thought the only way we were going to get out was to pay a ransom, or I knew the organization had insurance. I figured we were in it for a really, really long haul. And so to understand, and I still, like, it's been 10 years, like I still have a really hard time conceptualizing what happened and why it happened and how lucky I actually am. And I think about it every day.
Well, it makes me incredibly proud of the special operations community and of our leaders to make that decision. And in reading your book, even and hearing and reading those words, it actually made me emotional because I've never been part of a hostage rescue. organizations and special operations that I was a part of is not our core mission. But knowing many people from that unit and from the units who do this, and the caliber of person, and speaking on this podcast about what we use to recruit and assess these folks, they are the best, and they are the most proficient at what they do. And it makes me incredibly proud that we have folks who go out there every single day and do this work, because America made a commitment to our citizens that very, very few other countries have. And that is that we will come get you.
Yeah.
And there are two, there's a couple of commitments that we've made. Number one, we will come get you. And number two, we will hunt you down if you are the ones who did this. And I think that those are factors when you talk about the people and the mission that we have and that commitment that we have as a nation that set us apart and truly do make this country the greatest country in the world.
Well, I would say when you're in a hostage situation, it really is a fortunate thing to belong to a country who will stop at nothing if it can. And, oftentimes, especially working in volunteer capacity with Hostage US, I am in the company of many people who have not been the beneficiaries of the same kind of circumstances that I have for reasons that I am not privy to.
Yeah.
And I think that there's just so much at play that's so much bigger than I can ever have the capacity really to understand. And when, from my understanding, like all of the stars have to be so aligned in order for a rescue operation like this to even like the wheels be set in motion, but for it to actually be successful, it just, so many things can go wrong. Not only can the hostage be lost, but the rescuers as well. And I'm so lucky that I can sit here and be here and alive and well and talk about this now, but I can also sit here and know that no, there wasn't any loss of life on the American side, because I don't think I would have been able to recover as well as I have been able to if I had known that somebody gave their life for me. But the understanding that there was a willingness to do so.
Yeah. Didn't even know you.
Yeah, it is beyond comprehension.
Yeah. Let's talk about reintegration and coming back from that. And what did that process look like for you? And I know you had to go through, you got to go through the processing, and they sent you to Djibouti, but coming home, coming home back to the U.S., back to your family.
I would say that the coming home part is the hardest part, and is something that I've been very committed to messaging, I think, with Hostage US. I call it surviving survival. There's a book written by a journalist named Lawrence Gonzalez, and he wrote a book called Surviving Survival, and it's mainly case studies about, people who've been like in shipwrecks or shark attacks. There are no hostages in there. Maybe he'll write a sequel, but it was the first time I had come across anything that resonated with me, and it was like 5 years into my freedom. The reintegration process is so difficult, and it is so stressful, and this is where Hostage US really comes in and steps in for the former hostage. Many of us have ended up in these places where this happened to us because we're doing work that we love, that we are very much connected. It's very much connected to our purpose. And so for me, I was not able to go back and continue my work. I lost my profession. Sure, I could still teach, but I had no idea how I was going to do that. I lost my home. I had to leave Kenya, where I thought I was going to have this life and raise a family. And my PTSD was so bad that I had to leave and relocate back to the US, which is not a bad thing. It was the right thing. But it was really, really hard. Many of us have major financial complications that take place while we're in captivity. My student loans went into default, and no one could get access to my accounts. And so it took me 7 years to rebuild my credit, because even after I came back and explained and had letters from the FBI and all of that, there was no box for them to check to clear me of my default. So I just was stuck. People can't pay their taxes, or, they haven't left passwords with their family members because no one thinks that they're going to get kidnapped and held for months, if not years. So there's basically, I think for many of us, we feel like we have to come back and we have to start all over and we have to rebuild. And not only are you rebuilding a life that you're supposed to be really grateful for, but you're not sure you ever really wanted it. You didn't know it was going to look this way because you'd spent a whole lifetime working to build another one that got taken away from you. You're also strapped with PTSD and anxiety and depression and financial problems. So it's not all sunshine and roses when you come back. It can be really, really difficult. And then, how do you relate to people? My book is called Impossible Odds, but I always joke that the impossible odds was that I got pregnant with my son like 3 weeks after the rescue. And so here I am, like a year out, pushing my kid on or like at the playground or whatever. And talking about being a hostage by Somali pirates is not something that you talk about on the playground with the other moms. But I just couldn't relate. So socially, there are a lot of, I think, complications, and it's taken me a really, really long time. This has been, this is why I call my next book that's coming out in January, Deserts to Mountaintops, because it's its own kind of desert coming back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I want to talk about the book. First, I want to ask Liz about Hostage US involvement in this reintegration process. And Jessica outlined a number of the challenges that are faced upon coming home. So where's the organization plugging in and supporting?
Yeah, and actually Jess has been kind of monumental in forming some of those support services. And, unfortunately, you don't want to be the case study ever. But, when she came back, she really dove into helping us build up the services that we're able to offer. So when people come home, the government mandate is to get people home, right? So the support stops. And there's that huge, massive gap that Jess is just talking about where you want to be joyous because you came home and you are, but there's an entire lifetime to rebuild, right? No matter how long you were taken, it's your life is completely turned upside down. So one of the supports that we provide on the career side, which is a really interesting thing that Jess and I have been talking about for years, and how do you go from being an international traveler, international worker to being forced essentially to be back home in the U.S. So we actually have resume. I mean, this is like kind of funny, but we have resume reviewers who can help write explanations for a year or two gap in your resume, because people literally will ask, why is there a gap in your resume? And you have to say, all right, I was held hostage for X amount of time. And to explain that is
tell me a time where you faced adversity. This one time,
right,
I was driving down the road in Somalia.
Yeah. It's cue the you've just grown an extra head.
Exactly. Like the disbelief that, all right, check, crazy person moving that resume to that side.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the disbelief around it is very serious. So we have the resume reviewer folks, we have career counselors, we have just on that side of the career spectrum, but then the finance. So we're building partnerships with credit bureaus so that when people are taken, we're able to flag it for them and say, hey, this is what's happening. Can you freeze the credit?
That's crazy. Like your story there about just that they can't fix something. I mean, this is like a clerical error. Come on.
Yeah, but they don't. They can't because they have policies and procedures.
Yeah.
And everybody's just doing their job.
Everyone's doing their job.
I'm sure you got sick of hearing that.
I mean, I again am lucky. Like that was the major sticking point for me. But I've heard just horror stories of people's financial like almost ruin. And again, like especially if you've had to pay like a ransom. I mean, I can't even like I thought about that a lot. Like who was gonna sell their house and mortgage,
right.
I cannot again explain to you how lucky I am. So
yeah, and I mean, I think the financial aspect of it is definitely that initial hurdle, and the of course the physical aspects, but then it's just refocusing your life and your career, your passion, your everything, and how that's going to look. And we do the same thing we do with families and walk with them through that process and just getting support that they need throughout the entire journey.
What's the focus of Hostage US going into 2023?
Great question.
Executive director had to ask
the question. Yeah. So one of the big challenges just in the society right now, right, is mental health. For our people, it's exacerbated by tenfold, if more. So we're building new partnerships with mental health practitioners to be able to offer a bit of a different type of mental health, and that's resilience and coping skills. So families to learn skills to help themselves and help kind of take the next steps. Of course, building therapeutic options as well, and in relationships with therapists and things like that. But what we really want to focus on is the skill building for families, because ultimately they're taking on a second full-time job responding to the cases. Some people don't want to necessarily add in another relationship of a therapist and that type of thing. So how can we think about that in a more creative way? And one of the solutions to that is teaching them skills to cope through it. So that's one of the big things. And then just building out some supports for the wrongful detention cases that we support, which is different than hostage cases. And that could be another hour-long conversation. But we're definitely seeing increases in wrongful detentions, and countries recognizing that holding Americans is a political gain for them. So unfortunately, as we expect that to increase, we're building capacity to support those families as well.
Jess, Deserts to Mountaintops. It's coming out in January.
Yes.
What are we going to look forward to? And you're coming back. You're going to come back on, and we're going to do a conversation about the book.
Yeah. Well, I talked about it's taken me 10 years to rebuild. I mean, little by little, or for me, I use the metaphor of hiking because my dad lives in the mountains and I've spent a lot of time hiking trails with him as part of, I think, my recovery. And so, a large part of my story that I have come to understand and then reclaim is that, this kidnapping wouldn't have happened if I had just listened to my intuition, because I knew something was wrong. I knew something bad was impending, and I just dismissed myself and my inner knowing, because that's culturally what I've been trained to do. And as women, I think we're very much conditioned to do that. And so I have really pivoted, and I am really committed to supporting and empowering women to reclaim their voices. And so that's what this book is about. It's an anthology. So it's 22 women's stories of how they've reclaimed their voice through all kinds of really hard and really beautiful experiences and really strong, powerful voices. And I'm very, very proud of it because it also symbolizes to me a new beginning. It comes out on January 25th, 2023, which will be the 11-year anniversary of my rescue. And that's very significant for me because it is definitely a mountaintop that sometimes I didn't think I was going to get to, because this has been really, really hard, but it's also been really, really worth it. And I'm really proud.
Well, I look forward to it.
Thanks.
So I'm going to ask you both this question because I ask everybody. I think it's the best question we have. What you say? It's going to be hard.
Really nervous. I get
Think
nervous
about your
when we
answer
get
before
these
you know the
answers.
question.
The Jedburghs of World War II had to do 3 things every day to be effective, and call them foundations or habits. They had to be able to shoot, they had to be able to move, and they had to be able to communicate. If they did those things with the utmost precision, then they could focus their attention on more complex challenges that came their way. What do you do, each of you, every day, those 3 things that set the conditions for success in your world? You could choose who starts.
Okay. I'll go first. Hydrate.
Yeah.
Hydrate for sure.
Yeah.
And the second thing is pretty much every day I focus on where my expertise ends and where I know somebody who's smarter at what I need to be doing. So I do a lot of reaching out to the smarter people in the world and learning from them. And I know a little bit about a lot of things, and I like that. And I like to reach out to, the experts and always kind of remain in that humble zone of knowing that there's always a smarter person. And then the last I'm going to actually take from the team is communicate, over communicate, and ensure that what you're saying and the way you're saying it makes sense to others, and being self-aware in that way.
Love those. Yeah.
So you're on the spot now.
Okay. I would say, well, I have a very, I call it my sacred start. So I'm very, very committed and very routine about my mornings. And so I get up around 5:30, so I can have an hour of time before my children start demanding breakfast.
Yeah, they don't ask.
No, I know, right? What do I look like? And then in that sacred start, it would be my prayer time. I write, I journal, I visualize, and I do my affirmations and gratitude. I employ that in the morning and at night if I don't fall asleep first. So that's more than 3, but those are critical to just my everyday functioning. And I think that for me, that's how I've been able to heal.
The sacred start.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Hydrate, know what you're good at, and communicate. All right. So I didn't get a chance to say it before we started. I was going to tell you, Liz, but I want you to know that I would love to do whatever we can to push the message of Hostage US on the Jedburgh podcast. So please let me know, whatever it takes, however we can, partner with you, push the message out. Please think of us as an outlet for all of your initiatives, and we can certainly talk more about it. But
thank you
I'd
so
love
much.
to be able to do that, because I think that what you're doing is so impactful.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
And I told you when I spoke with Mike, I had to assign him, because at the end of these conversations, I take these 9 characteristics that I spoke about and that we talked about here, and I pick one and I say that my guest and their story exemplifies one of these, based on what we talked about. But with Mike, I looked at him and I said, "There's no way I can pick one here. You didn't get through without all of it." And I think the organization itself, yourself, Jess, continue to exemplify all of those. So I have no way that I'd be able at the end of this say that one is greater than the other, but I am inspired by reading your book. I look forward to the next one. I think that going through these ordeals, we do talk about effective intelligence a lot, but it changes us. And you've talked a lot about that here today, and becoming a much different person through this process. But understanding that, knowing that, I think motivates me, and it empowers me to think about the experiences that others have gone through in their life. Thinking about your rescue continues to instill in me the pride in this nation and my brothers in arms who continue to serve and do this work. And Hostage US as an organization, just their commitment to our people and to our citizens, and to be there, and all those who support the organization, is tremendously impactful. Appreciate you spending some time with me today.
Oh, thanks so much. It's good to be here.
Thank you.
American Jedburghs went out to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh podcast. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other behind-the-scenes content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow me, Fran Racioppi, Talent War Group, and our sponsor Jersey Mike Subs on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Send your comments and inquiries to media@talentwargroup.com. As a former member of Special Forces, the Jedburgh podcast donates a percentage of all proceeds to the Green Beret Foundation, supporting America's Special Forces and their families. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.